Okay. Figured I wouldn't keep you guys waiting for 10 minutes this time. Hello and welcome to my channel, Re-Vera. My name is Steve, and I am so excited about our topic tonight. So I did want to recap over yesterday and check with the audience as to how my audio and video is coming through. So please let me know in comments if everything sounds all right. And if everything looks all right. And so the homework from last stream was working on the belief all problems have a best solution. So let me know how that went in comments. If anyone has any pushback, if you have a problem you kind of doubt that's solvable or you need help with, that's what we're all about. So I would love to talk about it either privately or as part of the channel conversation. So let me know. Yeah, cool. Sounds good. All right. So let's jump right into it. That's the one I want. Alrighty. So we got comments on one side and my notes on the other. So I think recaps are good. I don't want to belabor the issue, but when we revisit a topic we already talked about, we have the advantage of having thought about it for a couple of days, and you can chime in with anything that's come up after thinking about it. Plus, it reinforces it and helps us learn it a little better. So, plus I have the notes all here, so sometimes it helps to kind of methodologically line it out to kind of see what we're talking about a little better. So, all problems start with the belief all problems have a best solution. So when you believe this practical, optimistic type of mindset, when you embrace it, then when you come up against a hurdle, you're automatically thinking how to overcome it. And that mindset is the most beneficial thing to your future success, without question. So work on it. It's not automatic, and our natural human behavior is going to kick in, and we're going to just embrace the status quo and just complain about it or get annoyed by it or frustrated by it, and that's still going to happen. But the more we embrace this mentality, the more we're going to actually tackle our beliefs, our problems. So I highly recommend writing out a list of problems that come to mind and prioritizing them. Like, do this methodologically. So what if you had a magic wand to fix problems in your life? What things would matter the most to you? What things would change your life the most? So think about it. All right, so define the problem. This is basically introspection. Is the presenting problem the real problem or a symptom? What's causing the problem? These are the kind of questions you ask as part of the first step of the process. And it can help to get a third party on it, because a lot of times it takes a lot of experience and practice to get good at the introspection. So with some especially more complicated problems, it's very beneficial to get a third-party perspective on it. And that's why people hire therapists, counselors, and come to shows like this. So definitely would love to help with anything we got. So find the best available solution. This is critical thinking, because if you Google something or ask 10 people, you're going to get 10 different opinions. That's just how it works. We want to compare them using sound reasoning and evidence, so we don't waste time with the wrong one. I wanted to tell a story that illustrates this very well that I didn't talk about on Wednesday's stream. So I said I was unemployed for a couple years, went through a miserable time in my life. When I started solving my problems, one of the things I did is I was like, I'm going to take any job I possibly can, does not matter, just go to the help wanted ads and just whatever I can do. And the only thing I could do, because I had no relevant experience outside of construction and nobody in construction was hiring. I literally called everybody in the phone book. Nobody was hiring. So that's out. That's all my experience. I also didn't have any education outside of being homeschooled. So wasn't super effective at getting a job. And I didn't have a driver's license or car. Most of the entry-level positions that were in the help wanted was they either required experience, education, or at the least a car, or at the very least a driver's license. I didn't have any of that. But I did find one help wanted ad that was hiring everybody, and it was Kirby's. They sell vacuums door to door. And the reason they hire anybody is because they don't hire you as an employee. They hire you as an independent contractor. So they don't have to pay you unless you're producing for them. It was pure commission, no guarantees. So of course they'll hire anybody. Hey, Coop. I would like to think can be some kind of life coach. That's the purpose of the channel. I've solved a lot of problems in my life. I tend to be very good at solving problems. I'm passionate about solving problems. And I think I'm bringing a different kind of perspective to it than I've seen anywhere else. I've followed a lot of self-improvement gurus. I've been to Tony Robbins. I grew up with a bunch of them because my parents were into network marketing, and they brought me along to all these conferences and bought the recordings, all that stuff. So I'm familiar with it, and I've never seen anybody take the angle of basically how critical thinking applies to this field, how we can methodologically solve our problems. Because it's not just about belief. The right belief is important, like I started with. All problems have a best solution. If you start with this mindset, that's going to be super powerful. But I'm not just going to talk about that. I'm going to be bringing the critical thinking and problem-solving approach to all kinds of things. I love talking about politics and worldview issues and philosophy, and we're going to get into all kinds of stuff eventually. But absolutely. So anyway, back to the Kirby story. They bring you in with a kind of deceitful ad that says there's a $2,000 a month guarantee with no strings attached, no experience required. Just come in, you'll get $2,000 a month. So I went to the recruiting little meeting, and turns out in order to get to $2,000 a month, you needed to do 60 demos in a month, and they don't set those up for you. You have to knock on doors and set up demos yourself. And nobody did, like, I think the most I ever saw was like 45 demos a month. So nobody was hitting that. So you very quickly, not only that, but they have two commission structures. You can sign on to the guaranteed one where your commissions are like half of what they would be. And if you don't hit your quota, which nobody does, you're screwed. Or you can sign on to the other one, which has a much higher commission level but no guarantee. So basically, it's a kind of a bait and switch. They bring you in with the guarantee, and then you quickly realize that's shit, and you go over and get the other plan. So it's pure commission. But it was a job. It was something I could do. It was, I had the chance to make money. I didn't have the chance to make money sitting at home. So I took it, and I was working it. And I was very optimistic about it. It's kind of a lot like network marketing. It's a direct marketing company. So it's very, rah, you can do this. They point to examples of success. They tell you you can buy anything you want if you stick with it. And there's different levels of the company you can climb up to. And there's a lot of propaganda they're pushing about how this is the answer to all my problems. And I wanted to believe it. I did pretty well in my first month or two. I was like, yeah, this could work. This could pull me out of the rut I've been in. I'm good with it. Let's go. And but fortunately, the critical thinking process I was working into, I started thinking, what's the best available solution? And I started applying skepticism to the claims I'm hearing. So I started looking around, and I think a good metric is I believe I can do anything anybody else can. So I'm looking around at this office in this area because that's what's relevant. I don't care what some other office does in some other area because maybe that area is better for selling Kirby's. So what does this office do? And the highest paid person in the office owned a house and a car, which was cool. But she could never make the mortgage, so she had like 3 roommates, and it was a really old, beat-down house, and her car was like 15 years old. Everybody else in the office, as I got to know them better, was renting rooms. They didn't have vehicles. They're taking the bus to work. They're like scrimping pennies to get lunch, because every time we had to go to like Safeway to get lunch for people, because not everyone could afford fast food. So we'd buy like 90-cent bread and stuff. So I using the skepticism, I was able to kind of disconnect myself from this propaganda, which could have wasted years of my life. I made several good friends there, and there's particularly 4 of them I'm thinking of. And they're suffering from an investment bias. They've been doing it for years and years, and they don't want to admit that it hasn't been successful for them. So they stick with it. And that's the kind of thing we want to avoid by finding the best available solution. So basically, after 4 or 5 months, I started looking for other jobs, and I applied. I started looking online. I learned about how to write a good resume, how to do a good interview, like I talked about in the last stream, and I leveraged the experience I had into a position at a car dealership that was much more steady, and my life has just been great since then. So it was a good decision for me. It was a real job. It had dental, it had vision, it had health insurance. It was still commission, but there was a guaranteed base level, and there's enough traffic coming in automatically that you don't have to go knock on doors to get, that people make a full-time income with it. And it was very good for me. I worked very hard. I worked my way up in the company, and that was good. But this is the thing. If you get stuck on the wrong solution, even if it might work in the short term, it can waste years of your life. So we want to look for the best available solution. So take a little bit extra time, analyze the situation you're in, think about what you can do better. Wow. My advice got you, Marilyn. She's actually my wife, talking shit over here in chat. Yes, I was very lonely, and I applied my methodological approach to problem solving to relationships, and it worked quite well. So, absolutely. Anyway, so the third step is implementing the solution. So, it's not just pure willpower. I think a big mistake we make is beating ourselves up when we don't do what we want to do. But you're not going to get very far with pure willpower alone. If there's a reason you're not doing something, there's a reason you're not doing something. If we discover that reason and overcome it, then it's going to just happen naturally. So we can rewrite our mental pathways and train ourselves and eliminate the blocks and make it easy to achieve our goals by better implementing the solution. So anyway, we implement the solution, and if we're not successful, we want to analyze why we weren't successful. Was the solution properly implemented? If so, it's the wrong solution if it didn't solve your problem. If you weren't able to implement the solution, then that's its own problem, and we need to define the problem and figure out why we aren't able to implement it. So there's a lot of different, there's obviously all kinds of domains of life this can apply to. If it's a personal problem, like we're trying to lose weight, something like that, trying to quit smoking, then it's probably going to be something mental, and we're going to want to work on that. Nice to have you here, Co-op. I actually created a Discord community, and everybody is invited. I'll be hanging out there pretty often, so if you just want to have a more casual chat that's not being recorded, anything like that, welcome to drop by. Also, if there's nobody in my own server, I go to Vosh's sometimes. So let me put that in chat real quick. There we go. So feel free to hop on over, and after I'm done streaming, we can chat if you'd like. By the way, Co-op, where'd you see that I was streaming? Did you just come in from YouTube, or did you see one of the posts somewhere? All right, so that's the recap from Wednesday. Define the problem, find the best available solution, implement the solution. And if that's not successful, analyze, reassess, and do it again. And it works. Like this, basically, if you're applying a simple plan like this to problems and you're doing it, it's going to be a lot better than not. self-evidently. So that's why the belief's so important, because if you believe you can solve your problems, you will. Because why wouldn't you? You're not going to just like ignore them if you believe you can overcome them. So think about that. Like, to me, that was the biggest realization ever. I still remember I was unemployed. I was miserable. Pretty much everything was going wrong in my life. I had no credit, no money, no relationships, no friendships. I was just lonely. And I was walking one day. I actually had to walk all the way to the food bank to get food. It was at least 2 miles. I think I Googled it. It was like 2.3 miles one way, and then back with the food. It's a miserable walk. Like my feet would hurt, my shoulders would hurt, my hands would hurt, carrying all these bags for 2 miles. I was too proud to ask for help at the time, which is a huge mistake. Part of solving problems is relying on your support systems and accepting help from other people. And it was a lot more miserable than it could have been because of that. Oh yeah, Vice Rhino. I've been watching him for quite a while. He's good stuff. Okay, so that's that. Now, a lot of this process, all of this process, is happening in our mind. Understanding the mind is the most important thing in life. I remember when I think I was 12, and I was just getting to that age where it's like, okay, superheroes aren't real. There's no such thing as superpowers. And I was thinking to myself, what like real life skill is the most important skill? Like, if you could think about one thing that would help you the most. And I'm very impressed with my younger self that I came to the conclusion that the most important skill is influencing other people, which comes to understanding the mind. Because if I understand my own mind and other people's mind, that helps us influence. So this is how political action happens. We need to influence people. This is how relationships happen. This is how we get promoted at work, or we get jobs in the first place. At interviews, so much of our life comes down to influencing people. And the most powerful people in society are typically really good at it. So it's super important. And that's started this hobby interest I had in the mind. And I've been interested in it my whole life. I took a 2-year degree in hypnotherapy. That's like the only credit I have in this path. But it's a fascinating study. And we're going to do some basics on how we understand the mind. So here we go. So how does the mind work? Well, the mind obviously contains our entire experience of reality. And so everything is filtered through our mind. There's nothing more important. The good things in life, the bad thing in life, it all filters through the mind, and nothing could possibly be more important than that. Pretty simple. The conscious-unconscious distinction. So everything that happens in your conscious mind is the conscious mind. So this is fairly self-explanatory. Your running stream of thoughts, everything that you notice with your conscious mind. You notice it's hot. You notice it's cold. You notice how your clothes feel. You notice how things look. All your senses, like everything that you notice, that's your conscious mind. Your unconscious mind, or what used to be called the subconscious mind, is everything your mind does that you're not consciously aware of. So, just because I have heard some weird people, be skeptical about it, it's fairly self-evident that we have an unconscious mind if you think about it, because there's a lot of things we know the mind does that we're not consciously aware of. So I'm not telling my brain, I'm not telling my heart to beat, I'm not telling my lungs to breathe, I'm not telling myself to feel hunger, I'm not telling myself, I'm not consciously organizing my memories. There's a lot of things I'm not doing. But this goes into how powerful the unconscious mind is, because there's no limits on it. With the conscious mind, we have 2 to 5 message units we can accept at the same time. So I might be able to hold a conversation and notice it's a little chilly in here at the same time. But if I'm in a busy restaurant, I might be able to hold a conversation and taste the food, but I'm not going to follow the 10 other conversations that are in earshot. I'm not going to notice each of the 50 people in the restaurant. I'm not going to to single out each individual smell. But the subconscious does. And how we know the subconscious does is because as soon as something happens that might be relevant to you, the unconscious mind flags it, and all of a sudden you notice it. So think about this. You're in a busy restaurant. You're focused on the person you're talking to. You're eating your food. And 20 people have walked past. You haven't noticed any of them. And then all of a sudden, somebody you know goes to walk past. You notice them. The conversations you're overhearing, you don't notice any of them. And then all of a sudden, somebody says your name. Bam, you heard that. Because your unconscious mind is hearing all of this. So the unconscious mind is not nearly as limited as the conscious mind. It absorbs far more information, and it processes far more information. It can have who knows how many independent processes going on at the same time, thousands, millions, a lot. And because of that, it's much faster. You think about like what's going through a quarterback's mind when he's making a decision. He's looking at his entire team, the opponent's entire team, their speeds, their body language of whether they're going to change direction. He has to calculate the arc of the ball he's going to throw it at, the speed of the ball he's going to throw it at to hit a very small window. He's not doing all this consciously. He can't. There's no possible way he could. But because he's trained it so many times and he's watched so much film and he's trained his subconscious mind, it all happens automatically because the subconscious mind can calculate all these different elements in a second or two. So that's kind of the difference between the conscious and the unconscious mind. But I did want to talk about their relationship. So they're not completely disconnected, obviously. It's all part of the same mind. So the unconscious mind notices everything. It's noticing what's going on in the world. All the data you collect from your senses is going through your unconscious mind. And it's also paying special attention to your own conscious mind. So it learns from the conscious mind. If you change a belief in your conscious mind, it can affect the unconscious mind. Now, how does the unconscious mind communicate to the conscious mind when we're not conscious of it? This is through intuition, or feelings. So whenever you have a sense about something, that's your unconscious mind talking to you. Your instincts, how you feel about different things. All of our biases, like it's all coming through the intuition. And it's a powerful thing, intuition, but it's not perfect. So, like I said with the quarterbacks, you can train your unconscious mind through obsessive visualization, through training, through practice. You can train your unconscious mind to be better. Basically, when you tell your mind that you want something, a good example is when we draw a blank, right? So we're talking conversation, we pull a blank. Happens to me all the time. Probably happen on the stream. We forget what we're trying to say. We think of a name and we can't remember the name. And we're sending these queries to the unconscious. What was the name of that guy? What was the name of that guy? What was the name of that guy? And then maybe you remember, maybe you whatever. And you keep talking and you forget all about it. And then 5 minutes later, an hour later, the next day, all of a sudden it pops into your brain. Because your unconscious mind didn't forget about that search query that went in. It was working that whole time trying to find that memory. So the more queries you're putting into it, the more of the unconscious mind's resources it's going to devote to that problem. So I think this is why every person who's pulled off some powerful, unique advancement of human knowledge, if you're talking about Isaac Newton or Thomas Edison or any of these people, they all had periods of obsession where they just focused nonstop. Albert Einstein on a specific problem. And they focused on it obsessively, and they kept sending these queries to their unconscious mind, kind of like how AI works, actually. And the unconscious mind responds back, and it pops ideas in your head. And you look at the idea, and you're like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. It's wrong. And the unconscious mind learns from that, and it keeps evolving its model until it figures out what you're looking for. So this obsession and asking your unconscious mind is what drives this. So intuition is a very powerful mode of thought, but it's also responsible for all of our human biases, all of the mistakes, and our current problems. If our intuition was perfect, we wouldn't have the current problems we have. So, the good, the bad, the ugly, it's the best form of thought. It's the fastest form of thought, I should say. But it's not limited. That's a good thing. It has a lot more resources. But it's only as accurate as the axioms we're working off of. I was going to pull up this dice thought experiment. I think I can do it from memory, but we'll see. I forgot to pull it up. Because it's a perfect example of our minds is only as accurate as the axioms it's working off of. So I was in a group online and somebody proposed a little riddle, a little logic problem. And the problem goes, if I have a red dice and a blue dice, and I roll the red dice and it's a 6, what's the chances the blue dice is also 6? Well, it's 1 in 6. Pretty clearly, that's pretty obvious. Step 2 of the problem. What if the dice are rolled, but I don't tell you what color is what color? All I tell you is one of the dice is a 6. Now, what's the chances that they're both 6, but you don't know what color it is? It's not 1 in 6. This is really weird. And I struggled with it. I argued with it. I was kind of combative in the chat. I thought there's no way this was right. I debated it endlessly until it was finally proven to me so many ways I could no longer deny it. And it's not. You can... what I finally did to prove it to myself, because somebody told me I needed to do this, is I literally went into notes and I wrote down every combination of every possible way you can roll the dice. So, there's 1, 1, there's 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 5, blah, blah, blah. There's 36 total ways you can roll those dice. Now, if you cross out any of them that don't have any 6s, that's how many chances you have. That's the set of variables we have, and only one of them has 2 6s, and it's not 1 in 6. It's actually 1 in 11, if I don't mistake, which is weird, and it doesn't make sense because a lot of us are missing the correct mathematical variable in our mind to make sense of that. So that's why we can't trust entirely in our intuition, and that's why we need methodologies to control against our intuition. Because otherwise, we don't advance beyond the problems we currently have if we're relying on our intuition. To me, when people talk about common sense, they're virtually always talking about intuitive reasoning. And I think this is why whenever someone says common sense, somebody's guaranteed to respond, "Hey, it's not so common anymore." Which, exactly, because it's intuitive reasoning, it's based on our experiences and our axioms, and everybody's mind is different. So, of course, everybody's version of common sense is different, which makes it seem, from your limited perspective, to not be very common. So, common sense is actually not a very good mode of thought. How are we doing in chat? Any questions so far? Anything we want to talk about? Alrighty. So, because we naturally rely on intuition so much, and because there's problems with that if we're not carefully training our intuition, if we're not studying what axioms it might be working off of that might be causing the problem, which is a lot of the therapy is trying to get into your brain, and what belief or axiom or core value is warping your behavior such that is causing the problem you're in therapy for. we can look at our behavior and our thoughts, and we can deduce from that what's driving the behavior in the unconscious, and then we can address it. And all of our bad impulses or anger, tribalism, and cognitive biases are coming through that. So very useful list of cognitive biases. If you just search list of cognitive biases on Wikipedia. Learned a lot from just kind of browsing through it, clicking on each bias and kind of reading about it and what studies have proven that it exists. So yeah, I was actually going to talk about heuristics a little earlier, because the unconscious mind, the intuition is basically, you could think of our unconscious mind as a heuristic reasoning machine, because we're not conscious of it. It's a machine ability. It's just operating off of inputs. It's just a machine. And we can educate it and warp it and make it do what we want by consciously analyzing it. This is super exciting to me. This is basically the next level of evolution, is us being conscious of our own mind and taking control of it instead of just being, controlled by it, you could say. So I highly recommend this Wikipedia article. There's so much you can learn just by clicking on each thing you're not very informed on. You can click on heuristics. You can click on how these work, and then they have this whole list of biases, and you can read about them. And when you understand a bias, you can be on the alert for it and control against it more effectively. So co-op, do I believe in New Age spiritualism or postmodernism or anything of those sorts? I try to avoid labels generally, because when you use a label, it puts you into a box for people, and it allows a kind of lazy thinking where it's like, this is a bad box I don't agree with, so I'm just going to put up my defensive walls and not listen to you. Or it's a good box, and now I'm crumbling my walls and I'm going to embrace what you're saying. In general, the reason I follow Vice Rano is because I'm probably think pretty similarly to him, and I believe in critical thinking and skepticism, and I don't believe things for which there isn't evidence. So there's a lot of kind of New Age spiritualism type stuff that's often in self-improvement. And the interesting thing is, even though if you look at what they're saying in a metaphoric sense, it often makes a lot of sense. So it might not be literally true, but sometimes it can be a useful metaphor for people. And I wish they wouldn't pretend it was literally true, because you don't need to believe something's literally true for it to be an effective metaphor. Postmodernism is a very broad thing that means different things to different people. So you would have to define what you mean by that. A lot of people take it to think, like the colloquial definition of what it means is kind of bad generally. So if you're thinking of, a lot of people think of postmodernism as it relates to truth, for instance, and that postmodernism is what says that there is no absolute truth. And because of that, everything's an opinion, man. So, like, whatever, you have your opinion, I have my opinion, they're all equally valid. Which isn't really what postmodernism means at the actual philosophical level, and it's not true either. It's true that there's not an absolute truth, because truth is filtered by our minds and we're not perfect. But it is not true that all opinions are equally valid. The law of contradiction very clearly shows that's not true. So you'll have to go into a little bit more detail about what you're talking about there. But in general, I believe in that which there is evidence for. How to learn. So I'd like to go into more detail about each of these, but this is just kind of a 101 introduction to the mind. And how to learn is all about repetition and emphasis. Like, if you just remember those two things, that will help you learn anything better. So obviously, if you repeat things often enough, you're going to learn it better. So the more you repeat stuff, the better you learn it. But if you don't really care, like we've all been through school and you studied for stuff, and if it was a subject you just did not care about or even disliked, then you can repeat stuff a lot and still it doesn't really stick. Emphasis is also important. This is mental emphasis. So as an example, if you're growing up and you live on a slow cul-de-sac and your parents tell you thousands of times, don't walk across the street without looking both ways, and you never really care, you never really listen, there's no emphasis there for you, it doesn't matter, nothing ever happens. It can take a while for that to stick. But if you're 6 years old and you step into the street and somebody grabs your collar and yanks you back just as a bus comes inches away from killing you, and looks in your eyes and shakes you and says, "Look both ways before you cross the street," that's going to stick. You will never need to be told that again. You will not be able to cross the road if you wanted to without looking both ways, because it's stuck, because there's emphasis. And so anytime you try to learn something, this helps you to realize this, to think about the focus. So if you really want to learn something difficult, working on making sure you enjoy it is a huge part of the process. Working on emphasizing it to yourself and realizing the importance of the subject matter you're talking about will help you learn it more effectively. So the combination of these two things is what, carves these paths in our brains and changes our everything to where we remember stuff. I'm pretty reasonably sure that the brain uses a relevancy metric, a lot like what Google uses. I'm the internet director at the moment, so we talk about relevancy all the time because it's the biggest thing in Google for SEO. And our mind uses a similar relevancy metric to determine what it keeps in what levels of storage and what it deletes entirely, assuming it deletes anything entirely. But there's clearly some memories that are closer to the surface, easier and faster to access, and others that are much deeper, and some that seem to just disappear entirely. Like, I don't care who you are or what. I very highly doubt you can remember who was on a bus one time with you when you were 8 years old that you never talked to or looked at. You just kind of walked past them one time and they were gone. Probably not going to remember that person. Nobody had, even though your unconscious mind saw them, if you never consciously took note of it, there's very little chance you'll ever remember that. Even if you did, it probably won't be. But the more relevant the subconscious, the unconscious mind thinks something is, the more accessible it is to your conscious mind. Now, habits are just like learning anything else. It's just about behavior. So it's a mental pathway that causes automatic behavior. So when I get in my car to drive home, I'm activating a habit that I've done a lot of times because I've been driving the same route for years. And the funny thing is, it's very difficult for me to deviate from that. If I get in my car and I think, I should stop at Best Buy on my way home, I'm going to remember that again when I pull in my driveway and not before then. It's like automatic behavior. I just go. If I'm like, I got to stop and get gas. I don't know. I get in my car. I don't remember anything until I get home. This is how a true habit often works, is you're not even thinking about it. It's just automatic. And this is very powerful if you moderate this and do it intentionally. Because if we can control our habits, break our bad habits, and build good habits, that's the biggest thing in the world towards having a better life. Oh, for sure, Troy. Yeah, I don't know if you're talking about personal history or like the societal history, but either way, it's not perfectly accurate. Definitely. The historical method is interesting, and it is a valuable academic method, but it's far from perfect. It's the best we got, but it's far from perfect. And clearly, history is written by the winners. A lot of history is lost when it's destroyed by other winners. So that's unfortunate. And when it comes to personal history, a lot of research has shown that our memory is far from perfect. So that's definitely an important thing to keep in mind. How we remember things that happened is very heavily moderated by our perspective on the events and how we remember it afterwards. Because there's a lot of evidence showing every time you remember an event, you're changing a little bit. And then the next time you remember that event, you're not actually remembering the event. You're remembering the event. It's kind of like telling a story. It's like the Chinese telephone game, right? Where it's like the story's changing a little bit each time. And our brain does that. So that's why you can only take eyewitness testimony so carefully, because it's far from perfect. So, all right, good stuff. So any other questions we have? How are we doing, chat? Yeah, stories like wine get better with age. It's often true. It depends on the perspective of the person telling it, I suppose. Sometimes they get worse with age. Oh, I could tell some stories. Talked about language yet. So language is fascinating. I grew up as I think, is it Viceroy? I'm pretty sure he grew up from an evangelical creationist background. I grew up in a similar background, only much worse. Have you ever watched The Duggars? We were literally in the same program they're in. Handmaid's Tale, yeah, that was pretty much us. It was the Advanced Training Institute, ATI. You can look it up. It's still active. It's fucked up. It's basically a cult. It's a homeschool organization. And my science textbooks were literally from the Institute for Creation Research. So, yeah, that's how I grew up. And one of the things I always wondered was the difference between humans and animals. And coming from a religious background, which I was not skeptical of that until I was like 28. So I was in that for a very long time. But the assumption from the religious background is that the difference between humans and animals is the soul or the spirit or something like that. Once I kind of changed my worldview from that after analyzing it critically, which is something I'm looking forward to getting into more on this channel. But one of the things I thought about was the difference between humans and animals. And I am convinced the difference between us is formal language. And that's it, because that explains everything. The fact that we have formalized language allows us to pass on so much more knowledge to future generations. And it's kind of like memetics. This is where the term meme comes from, because we've always had this slow natural selection working on our DNA of one form of information, but it happens slowly. There's limits on how fast that can change things. But with language, there's not really any limits. So that's what allowed us to go from basically tribes of almost animals, like probably, we imagine, like 10,000 years ago. We were probably 10,000 years ago, we had fire, we had stone tools, we had dogs, but we didn't have any written culture or civilization. So we were just tribes of hunter-gatherers, and that's about it. And then we figured out how to write things down. And civilization has been evolving at this crazy rate, evolutionarily speaking, ever since. So written language separated us from animals in a foundational way. And the next major evolution was definitely scientific method, because we kind of stalled out during the Dark Ages and weren't really making much progress until the Enlightenment. And the biggest thing in there was the scientific method, nullius in verba, and not taking people's words for things. We started analyzing claims critically. We started using methodology to rule out human subjectivity. And obviously, from there to now, that's what has allowed us to get to where we are now, where we're having an instant conversation all over the world instantaneously, which is pretty cool. Co-op. That's all the material, like the basics of the material I was getting through. I'm not sure how much longer I'll go. Kind of depends on how much more content you give me. So if you have any other questions, let me know. Definitely interesting to talk about. But language is a big one. It's very fascinating how it evolves, how it's used, how it symbolizes things in our mind. And speaking of mental discipline and how the mind works, actually language is a huge part of that. Meditation is a very powerful form of stress relief. I highly recommend everybody learns how to use. Regardless of what you may or may not think of Sam Harris, his Waking Up app is highly recommended. It's really good secular meditation aid. It teaches you how to meditate. It has short little lectures about it, and it's great stuff. I highly recommend it, and it's helps you discipline your mind as well as relax. But the interesting thing to me is almost everybody who talks about meditation seems to imply that you're accessing a higher level of consciousness. And from my experiences meditating, I think it's the opposite. I think we're kind of regressing our mind to the animal state, because the fundamental thing you're doing is trying to stop using language in your mind. You can't stop thought, but you can stop language. So you're focusing on your breathing and how it feels. You're focusing on what you feel. You're focusing on your senses, but not putting labels on it, leaving the language out. Like, just imagine you are your dog or your cat. They don't have language. They just feel things. And when you do that, when you cut off this layer of language, it's like your whole psyche just breathes a sigh of relief. Our physiological evolution could not possibly keep up with our civilizational evolution. So all of this language is lumped in together with all the stresses we have from civilization. And I think it's a massive relief to our deeper psyche when we just find a few seconds of cut off from that, when we just experience reality as it is without the filter of language. Which isn't to say, obviously, language is awesome, but try not using it for at least a few seconds. It's a very relaxing experience. It's fascinating. Try it. I struggled with meditation for a very long time until I think it was Sam Harris actually that put it in this way that helped me, which was basically focus on your feelings and not language, instead of trying not to think, because that's never going to happen. Just focus on not using words in your brain with your self-thought, and it's phenomenal how much it helps you control your brain, how much it helps relax you. Highly recommend it. I think my brother's preparing for his stream, which is Theory Plebe, and he's at 8 o'clock. So otherwise he'd be here, and he has a lot to say about language. He's graduated with his master's in philosophy and in critical theory, and we always have good talks about stuff like language. He's read a lot of deep texts about this symbolism of language and all that stuff. It is definitely a difficult exercise, Troy. But yeah, meditation, it is very beneficial in terms of just mental discipline, sitting down, doing it, stress relief. In terms of actually changing your thinking and your beliefs, visualization and hypnotherapy or self-hypnosis are different disciplines that are actually a lot more pragmatically beneficial. You have a similar feeling typically. After you've kind of gone into the hypnotic state and come out, you typically feel this release of stress. You feel more energy. It's a fantastic feeling. but you're also helping to reprogram your thoughts. So a hypnotic trance is basically, and they've shown this with all kinds of neuroscience and hook people up to machines and stuff. It's not that your mind is empty. It's actually an extremely focused brain state. You have more of your mind active than you usually do. You're ruling out all the distractions, and you're just following the words of the person who's leading you into the trance. So it's not that you're less focused or you're going to sleep or anything like that. You're actually more focused. And because you're more focused, there's more emphasis. And like we said with learning, more emphasis means you learn things better. So when you have in this super focused brain state, and you identify with and you agree with what the therapist is saying, then it has more impact on you. When I read my first book on hypnotherapy, I had this long-standing habit since I was 8 years old. When I first started getting hairs in my face, like little hairs here and there, I started pulling them out. And I think the name is, I forget the name, trichotillomania. I don't know, but it's a disorder where you compulsively pull hairs out, and it's well known to be one of the hardest habits to break. And I'd been doing it for 20 years at this point, and whenever I wasn't doing anything with my hands or nobody was looking at me, it was just natural to start pulling hairs out, and I couldn't help it. And I'd tried to break it so many ways. I'd prayed, I'd fasted because I was religious at the time. I'd done all kinds of stuff. I'd tried putting Band-Aids on my finger to remind all kinds of stuff. Nothing worked. I read this book on hypnotherapy. I did this visualization technique and self-hypnosis, and it cured me. One session, done. Never again. Unbelievable. There are a lot of people that have quit smoking in one session using hypnotherapy. It's a very powerful mode. There are limitations, of course. You can't be hypnotized into doing something you don't want to do. This is a common meme in fiction because it's a useful fictional element to have, to where somebody can take over your mind and hypnotize you and make you do stuff and forget stuff. And it's not really how the brain works. It's still your brain. So if I hypnotize you and I tell you to do something that's against your unconscious values, you will reject it because you're still you. Your unconscious mind still has the same basic mechanisms and values and axioms it's operating off of. And you can't just overrule that in one session. But you can start to rewrite stuff. You can start analyzing the core problem. You can visualize yourself doing the habit you want to do and breaking the habit you don't want to do. One of the common techniques people do in hypnotherapy, the one that worked for me so well, is basically it's you count down into the trance. You're super focused, and then you start visualizing yourself going through the very difficult, long process of breaking that habit. So you visualize yourself struggling with it and trying to break it and failing and trying to break it and failing, and then a week goes by and you're a little better, and another week goes by, you're a little better, and then you have a calendar flipping down over here and the months are going by and you're getting better and better until you get to this point where you've defeated the habit and you feel this victory, and you feel enthused, and you're super excited. You've beat the habit. There's no temptation there anymore. You're in the situation where you would normally have had the urge to light up a cigarette or whatever the habit is, and you're overwhelmed by the feeling that you have no desire whatsoever to do that. And you run through this visualization in 5 minutes. But when you get out of it, you feel like it's all taken place and you no longer have the desire. It's pretty cool. So a lot of cool stuff we can learn about that. Once we have the belief that we can solve our problems, if we look, we can find how to do that. Because the thing is, your problems are not unique. There are other people who've had the same problems and overcome them, and if we learn from them, we can follow in their footsteps. Success leaves clues. So I'd like to get into all of that stuff. I'm looking forward to, kind of being a life coach and helping people through the process. I think on my next stream, Monday stream, we're going to introduce how I'm going to be personally working on losing weight and getting back into shape. So I hinted at that on Wednesday's stream. I used to be an actual personal trainer at one point, part-time, so I know a lot about it. I know I can lose weight. I've done it before. I know a lot about it, and I know it's a common issue a lot of people have. A lot of people feel like they would be more confident if they lost weight. But keep in mind, that's not always the true problem. In fact, it's usually not. We want to lose weight for health and stuff like this, but it's often not the true problem, because a lot of times, even if you were to lose weight, you can still have the body insecurities you had before, because a lot of skinny people still have those concerns. So we want to also be working on our confidence and our security about how we feel in our own bodies, as well as losing weight for health reasons. So, any other questions in chat? What's something you'd like to talk about or work on? Or any pushback you have on anything I've said, anything you disagree with, anything you'd like to add to it? I don't think either of you were here last Wednesday. So I'm streaming 3 times a day, 3 times a week, just so you know. Wednesday, Friday, and Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Monday is my day off, so I might do some casual streams earlier as well, just to get some more stuff out there. But I'm looking forward to it, and anything you have to talk about, any concerns you have, I welcome them, and I look forward to addressing them. So, again, please join my Discord, and feel free to hop in there sometime and let me we can talk about stuff. Yes, anxiety is definitely something that it's a problem, and like all problems, it has a best solution. It can be complicated. I was just talking to somebody who had an anxiety attack, and I feel like I've had a couple, I think, myself, and it tends to be when we kind of hit our limits stress-wise. So I think a good metaphor for this is you imagine your brain, or a part of your brain, is a bucket. And it's absorbing message units all day, which are adding to the stress level. And then at night, you have a good night's sleep, it's emptying the bucket out. But if you're getting a lot more message units and stress than usual, and you're not emptying the bucket properly, your sleep is getting interrupted, you're not sleeping very well, then it starts getting to the top and it starts overflowing. And when it overflows, that can reflect in different types of neuroses or anxiety attacks. So this is where mental disciplines like self-hypnosis, where meditation, help you empty that bucket. Because after you've come out of a deep trance state, whether it's meditation or visualization or self-hypnosis, it's kind of like you feel like you're waking up. I do think that when you're in this mode, your brain does some of this sorting. It empties a little bit out of the bucket. When I've had important conferences or lectures that I really needed to learn, when I meditate on the breaks, it seems to help me absorb more the next time, I'm fresh. It really helps your learning, because it helps your brain. While it's still fresh, it gives it the opportunity to put some of this knowledge into the longer-term memory slots, basically. And so it helps with learning. It also helps de-stressing. There's a lot to anxiety. It can also be a chemical thing. It's every possibility. If you have a serious problem, which you don't, I know you, but if you have a serious problem, I highly recommend a psychiatrist, because I am not a licensed psychiatrist, and I probably should have said that sooner. I definitely don't want to give medical advice, and you should definitely get a professional opinion if there's something serious affecting you. If you have thoughts of suicide, there's helplines, things like this. So I'm not here to replace that, but I am here to provide some support and dialogue and conversation. So you're welcome to chime into my Discord, and we can talk about stuff more. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for being here, and we will continue this on Monday. Oh yes, subscribe, ring the bell, like, comment, join my Discord. Thanks.